What's up, everyone? We are diving back into the multiverse today for another epic. What if Naruto became Hellfire Reaper after death and built powerful harem with Haku, Hinata and Anko? Part 3. If you enjoy this story, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more fanfics like this. Now, let's dive right into the fanfic. Naruto then gazed at his hands and said, "Despite everyone calling me a hero, a champion of this village, I am none of that. The powers that helped me save this place were created by my own thirst for revenge and anger that stemmed from my failure to protect the ones I love. The evil that these hands had done for my failed cause is unmatched." The crowd was extremely focused on Naruto as he stood tall and said, "I'm not the champion this village claims I am. I am a failure of a shinobi. The heroes, the true champions of Wave are Tazuna, Kazuma, and the many others before me who have bled, cried, fought, and died for this village. They were the ones that saved this place. They had the light of hope forever shining in the shades of despair." Naruto took a deep breath and looked Zabuza in the eyes as he said, "The power that I have was created by my hate and my desire for revenge, but I made a vow to use these powers to bring hope and love to not only my village but to the world beyond. I want to be the light that shines even through the darkest of nights. That is my purpose." Zabuza smirked. "It's ironic. I had the same dreams when I staged a coup on my former cage, and I failed and barely escaped with my life. My light faded and burned out. I doubt you have the resolve to stick true to those words." Zabuza shouted at Naruto with anger in his voice. "You dare try to call me a liar?" Naruto roared. "I will be the light this world needs and I will kill anyone that stands in my way." Zabuza gave a dark grin and ran his hands through some seals before he shouted, "Then show me your resolve, Uzumaki Naruto." Sweden. Dasui aim, water release, draining rain. The area around Zabuza and Naruto's battle suddenly became dark as gray clouds formed over their makeshift arena, and once they were created, a heavy amount of rain came pouring down on both combatants. "Now come and fight me, light of hope," Zabuza mocked as he spread his arms out before he added, "so I can snuff you out." Naruto scoffed at this and started to run towards Zabuza once more, but the minute he took his first step, he realized that he was slower and that he was starting to feel a little weaker. Naruto pressed forward and continued to charge forward, and once he got close, he leapt up with his left knee on fire and attempted to nail Zabuza in the face, but Zabuza, who was now quicker, stepped to the side to avoid the knee before he kicked Naruto in the back hard enough for Naruto to bend against his foot. Zabuza then grabbed Naruto's head and twisted his body before tossing Naruto into a flower stand, shattering the wooden stand upon impact. Naruto lay upside down in the wooden crater before he forced himself out of it, but found himself heavier than he was before and asked, "What is this jutsu?" "Sweden. Dasui aim," Zabuza answered with a smirk. "With every drop of rain that hits you, it feels as if 5 pounds is added to your body, but not only that, it slowly drains your chakra as well. It takes quite a bit of chakra for me to pull off. And without that damn copycat or steam shinobi using all of my chakra, I can finally use it. I told you, Gaki, the warm-up is over." Naruto rolled out of the wreckage, rose to his feet and spat on the ground, his blue eyes seemingly glowing through the dense rain that was pouring over him. A nice trick. Unfortunately, an aura of hellfire flowed around Naruto, which caused the dense rain to float harmlessly around him as mist. "Hellfire beats water any day," Naruto taunted. Zabuza narrowed his eyes. That was his very own created jutsu, which took a lot of chakra to maintain, and yet this brat's hellfire made that aspect of his jutsu obsolete. But was the Gaki truly that strong? Or was the weakness of his jutsu due to still being weakened from the incident on the bridge a few days ago? No matter. Zabuza hissed and then charged at Naruto and aimed a punch at Naruto's face, but Naruto avoided the fist and landed 2 blows to the man's stomach and then twisted his body and kicked Zabuza in the chest, which made the man stagger back. "Let's see how you handle this. Sweden. Suiryuso water release, water flowing lance." The rain from his still active jutsu flowed into his hand, forming a lance out of it, and with a smirk, Zabuza launched the lance at Naruto. Naruto leapt to the left to avoid it, but because of the previous jutsu, he was still struck in the side. Naruto skidded to the side and held his hand against the bleeding spot where the middle of his ribs were and quickly had to avoid another water lance that was thrown his way, and this time, he was fully successful in dodging it. There is more to my jutsu than just its chakra draining and slowing properties, Zabuza said. It also boosts the speed of my jutsus. You may have that aura protecting you from the other effects of my rain, but for this, can your Hellfire keep up? Naruto narrowed his eyes as his aura of Hellfire flared, which caused more mist to flow around him, momentarily obscuring his view. I think it can, Naruto replied. When the mist faded from Naruto's eyes, Zabuza grinned and launched several lances at Naruto, who managed to avoid the quicker jutsu, as he charged towards Zabuza. Naruto then jumped into the air and shouted, "Come here." He threw out his right hand, which caused two thick strands of Hellfire to shoot towards Zabuza, which cooled out to reveal chains, which pierced the ground at the sides of Zabuza's feet. Naruto tugged at the ground, pulled himself at Zabuza, and landed a brutal knee to the middle of Zabuza's face, which sent the man to the ground. Naruto rolled off of Zabuza's face, pulled out a kunai, and held it at Zabuza's neck. Zabuza smirked and said, "Nice try," and then exploded into water. A clone? Naruto asked. When did he do that? You forget where you are, Gaki. Zabuza's voice laughed as he appeared behind Naruto, his blade poised in the air. I am the demon of the hidden mist and we're surrounded by water. Naruto twisted his body and barely managed to jump away before Zabuza's blade cleaved the air. Naruto skidded on his feet and scowled as Zabuza laughed. But Naruto could see the man's arms trembling. It took all the man had to lift that weapon. I'm impressed, Zabuza commented. The only one who could keep moving through the combination of these jutsus was Haku. To see another one do it is amazing. Perhaps you aren't just talking big. Naruto had remained silent, but through the dense rain, Zabuza saw a flicker of red-orange fire in the youth's eyes. Regardless of how impressive you are, you cannot win. Just give up, kid. No matter how strong you think you are, even in my weakened state, I can beat you with no problem. Just walk away. I refuse, Naruto replied with narrowed eyes. Why not? Zabuza asked him. The minute you put someone I care about in danger, I will tear myself apart to save them, Naruto answered with a serious expression on his face. Zabuza instantly realized he was speaking about Haku and chuckled. Why should I let her go with you? She is a broken tool who has been unable to defend anyone since she met you. She needs to be forced to be what I created her to be. She is no one's tool. Naruto growled. She was mine. Zabuza sharply replied. I saved her from death due to her bloodline. I trained her to serve me and me alone, therefore, she belongs to me. Zabuza then smirked as he recalled something Naruto had said earlier. Those powers came from you failing to protect those you loved. Why should I let my tool free be with a failure like you? Zabuza shouted. Naruto's eyes became emblazoned with fury as the aura around him increased. Zabuza's eyes widened a bit as the flames began to widen around Naruto's form, and he quickly formed several seals and shouted, Suiden, Suiryuden no Jutsu. The water around Zabuza quickly formed behind Zabuza and shot out towards Naruto, but just as it reached the blonde, Naruto leapt towards the dragon and punched it, causing the dragon to disperse into steam. Zabuza growled and summoned two water lances into his two hands and launched them both towards Naruto, but they too were rendered into steam by the charging Naruto. Zabuza growled and charged toward Naruto as he reared back his right hand and yelled, Suiden, Suiryuden Nakuru, water style, water dragon knuckle. The water swirled around his right fist to form the head of a dragon. Naruto reared back his right fist as a whirlwind of hellfire wrapped around his fist, and with a shout, the two slammed their respective elemental fists against one another, but like before, Naruto's hellfire evaporated the flame and slammed against Zabuza's fist, breaking the man's fist. Zabuza gritted his teeth as blood spurted from his knuckles before he kicked Naruto in the chest, which sent the younger shinobi sliding against the slick ground, but Naruto remained on his feet. Zabuza quickly dashed towards Naruto as he shouted, Suiden, Suiryuden Nakuru. Naruto's head rose as the fist slammed into the blonde's bare forehead as Naruto's hellfire-infused fist slammed into Zabuza's stomach. Everything went still for a moment before the water evaporated and Zabuza staggered back with his eyes flickering in and out of consciousness. All was quiet for a moment as the jutsu above the two began to fade away, causing the clear blue sky to appear back above them. The clone of Zabuza quickly disappeared along with the water orb, which allowed Haku to finally be free. The aura around Naruto faded and he quickly fell to one knee in exhaustion, only for Haku to skid down to him and hug him tightly, which he returned just as tightly. Through his wavering vision, Zabuza saw that Haku was beside Naruto and let out a harsh laugh. Why you? Zabuza began to stay, his vision once again fading briefly before he shook his head and willed his vision to become sharp once again. You were right before, I did fail to save those I cared for, Naruto panted as blood fell from his forehead. But I risked and lost it all to save Haku once before. If I have to die again to save her and anyone I care for, I will do it with a smile, just as I did before. Zabuza could feel the blood dripping down the middle of his chest and stomach and let out a small chuckle at the conviction in Naruto's eyes. I see, Zabuza started. I finally understand what she sees in you, Uzumaki Naruto. Zabuza stood up on shaky legs and walked towards his discarded Kubikiri Hako and picked it up before he also grabbed the large bag that Haku had been carrying before he ambushed her and trapped her in his jutsu. Once he lifted them, Zabuza walked towards Naruto, who was now on his feet with some assistance from Haku, and stopped before the two. Zabuza then stabbed the large blade into the ground before Naruto and said, I'm leaving both of my prized possessions in your hands, take care of them as they have of me. Naruto looked at the large blade and slowly, he placed his hand around the hilt before he looked to Zabuza and nodded wordlessly. Zabuza chuckled and said with an impressed tone, I can't wait to see the changes you will make in this world, Firefly. Naruto's eye twitched at the nickname as Zabuza turned to Haku and placed the bag into her hand. You've done well, Haku. With those words, Zabuza turned around and began to walk away, but he stopped when he heard Haku's voice shout out, Zabuza-sama. Zabuza turned his head and looked at the sadness in Haku's eyes, and for the first time, he allowed a loving smile to appear on his face. Haku, I haven't been your master since the moment I held your body as you slept after your first mission, Zabuza revealed. Haku gasped at this admission before tears fell down her cheeks. Zabuza chuckled and said, Take care, Masumi daughter, before he turned around and walked past the now parted crowd. As the crowd came together and rushed towards Naruto and Haku, Zabuza coughed violently and fell to one knee. But as he kneeled there, 2 feet appeared in his vision. Zabuza looked up and saw Tsunami standing before him. And here I thought your days in my guest room would end, Tsunami whispered. Are you okay? I will be, Zabuza muttered softly as he held his bloody chest with another cough. Tsunami kneeled down, helped Zabuza to his feet, placed his arm around her shoulders to allow him to be somewhat stable, and softly commanded, Come. Zabuza chuckled and leaned against her, and together, the two walked off back to Tsunami's house. Village of Wave, 2 days later. Pav. Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto, Haku, you two have done a great deal for this village and there is no way we could thank either of you enough, Tazuna said as he stood in front of a refreshed Naruto and Haku, both of them dressed in new attire. Haku was now dressed in a white pinstriped outfit that stopped at her knees. Over the outfit was a black haori with white trimmings, and around her waist was a dark slate gray sash with a fringed trail wrapped around her waist twice. Haku's long hair was gathered in a black bun holder, while 2 locks of her hair fell loose framing her face, bound with metal hair cuffs at the end of her locks, and around her neck was Kurigakure no Sato Hite Ite. Naruto was now dressed in a black short-sleeved skin-tight shirt that had a single orange strip going down the left side of his shirt. He also wore black shinobi pants that fell comfortably at his ankles, and on his hands were black fingerless gloves with steel plating over the knuckles of each glove. Over his waist was his old orange jacket that he couldn't part with, and on his forehead was his Konohagakure no Sato Hite Ite, but instead of a black sash, an orange one was in its place. On Naruto's back was Zabuza's Kubikiri Hako, fastened by the black sword holster that was wrapped around his torso. You guys don't have to thank us, Naruto said with a small smile. You put in all the effort to save this place. All we did was lend you our strength, Naruto continued. You give us far too much created, Tazuna said with a joyful laugh before he said, I know that you two must go, but you two are welcome here always. Tazuna and Naruto shook hands before Tsunami brought Naruto and Haku into a hug. You two take care of yourselves, Tsunami whispered to them both. That's an order from me and Zabuza. We will, Haku promised. Tsunami smiled and stepped away from the pair as Inari, with tears in his eyes, declared, "Don't worry about everyone. I'll protect them in your place, Ni-san." Naruto laughed and ruffled Inari's hair as he replied, "I leave the village in your capable hands, Inari. I know you'll make me proud. Always." Inari replied with a toothy smile, despite the tears that fell down his cheeks. Naruto and Haku then turned to Kodoha, who now was dressed in a brand new pink and white dress, and on her arm was the black sash that Naruto previously wore around his forehead, and hanging from her neck is Haku's Hunter Nin mask. But as Haku and Naruto imagined, Kodoha had tears in her eyes. "I don't want you guys to leave," Kodoha sniffled out as she hugged Naruto and Haku as tightly as she could. "Please don't leave," she cried as tears fell down her face. "We won't be gone for long, Kodoha-chan," Haku softly told the girl as she and Naruto held the small girl tightly. "We'll be back before you know it, we promise," Naruto whispered softly as he kissed the side of her head. "Besides, Inari and his family will watch after you." "Damn right," Tazuna said with a smile. "This little girl's father was the first one to help me with the bridge before he passed. It would be criminal if she didn't stay with us for good." Kodoha nodded tearfully and held out her hands, which had each pinky out as she asked, "Pinky promise?" Naruto and Haku smiled at each other before the two wrapped their pinkies around hers and said, "We promise," in unison. The little girl smiled and gave them each a tight hug before she joined Inari by his side and wiped her tears. Naruto and Haku rose to their feet and gave a bow to the crowd before the two of them walked out of the village, both of them smiling as the village gave a mass farewell cheer of their names. "So, where will we go first?" Haku asked with a smile on her face. "I was thinking we go wherever our feet take us," Naruto said with a bright smile on his face. "That sounds fine with me," Haku responded before the two traded soft kisses before they ran off into the unknown. Since that time, Sasuke had been having severe nightmares. Nightmares of eyes filled with hellfire along with the eyes of his brother, both of them stared down at him with malice and hate. Sasuke did not want to have the owner of the first set of eyes back in this village due to this pathetic fear. And yet for some reason, the Hokage wanted him back. Why did he want this monster back in their village? Don't they know how dangerous he was to them? "None of us like this, Haruno, but we'll just have to deal with this," Sasuke stated with an aggravated tone in his voice, which made Sakura look at him with a quirk of her brow before she shook her head. Ever since the mission in Wave along with her dream of Naruto a few days ago, Sakura felt her crush on the Uchiha heir dwindling day by day. She didn't understand how that could be possible at first, but as she took a long hard think on it, she realized that despite him being really cool, he wasn't receptive of her or anyone else in that matter. He kept everyone at a distance, and when anyone got too close, he would demean them until they went away. Sakura also theorized that perhaps spending time with the warm, sunny shinobi known as Uzumaki Naruto made her realize that the brooding bad boy thing wasn't all that it was cracked up to be. "We shouldn't have to drag him back. He was going to come back on his own," Sakura softly murmured to Kakashi. "If we try to force him to come back to where he doesn't want to be, he may never come back." "I know," Kakashi replied to her, his voice equally as softly. "But the Hokage has us by the proverbial balls. Either way, I'll be losing Naruto as my student. The best thing we can do is just find him and explain the situation." Sakura nodded and said, "I hope he understands." Kakashi looked down at Sakura and narrowed his eye in thought. Ever since the mission, her attitude toward Naruto has literally taken a 180-degree change. Kakashi then smiled. "Good. I'm glad. That's another person he will need on his side." Kakashi's brief good mood quickly died when he saw the other teams assigned and said to Sakura and Sasuke, "Well, let's get to it then." With a nod from his two students, the three of them stood up from the bench and stretched their limbs just as the large team of shinobi stopped in front of them. "Well, the Uzumaki hunting squad has arrived," Kiba said with an excited grin on his face, with an added woof from the excited Akamaru. "Can that not become a thing, please?" Sakura asked with a noticeable frown on her face, clearly not pleased by the name. "He's been calling it that since we joined up with them," Shikamaru muttered with a sigh as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. "How troublesome." "I agree. To have to drag him back here must be dreadful," Shino responded, having been told of what Naruto went through by Hinata, who was strangely quiet, but she had an air of determination around her that was felt by everyone around her. Come on now, do you guys honestly expect me to believe Naruto did all of that? Kiba asked with a laugh. The dead last of us. Defeating someone that defeated the copy Nin, Zabuza, and his girlfriend, also, him getting a girlfriend. Fighting some powerful shinobi and winning. Laughable. Neji chuckled and said, as much as it pains me to say this, I agree with this low-level genin. There is no feasible way that your dead last could ever match, nor defeat, anyone that can defeat Zabuza and Kakashi. Sakura hissed at their words, but she then only smirked. Fine. Don't believe me. You'll see when we get there, Sakura challenged. Sasuke merely scoffed and crossed his arms. Kakashi looked at the entire group and said, let's go guys. We're burning daylight. The group nodded and quickly dashed out of the village gates and into the wild. Asuma chuckled suddenly as the large group dashed from tree to tree and said, it's not a bad name, with a lit cigarette dangling from his lips. Kakashi, who was next to him, looked at him curiously before he realized what Asuma was talking about and merely scowled, but before he could say anything, another voice came in from between the two. Easy for you to say, Asuma, Anko responded with a scowl on her face, having been told by Kakashi about what went down between him and Naruto that caused all of this. We're basically dragging back someone who was going to come back, doesn't that seem wrong? Asuma shrugged and tapped the dust from his cigarette before placing it back into his mouth and taking another drag as he replied, I mean, I get it, but at the end of the day, he's a genin in a shinobi world. He has no say in leaving his team for another village, shinobi village or not. Kurenai, who was running beside Kakashi, shook her head at this and replied, but at the same time, Asuma, Anko and I did this at his age with no issues. I do agree that this feels wrong, but we have our orders. Anko nodded with a sullen look and looked towards Kakashi as if to say, I tried, before she scoffed and said, let's just hurry up and find the Gaki. Where would he be, Kakashi? Simple. He's in wave, Kakashi stated before he said, double time. I may not want to do this, but let's try to make this as quick and painless as possible. The shinobi lands. Pav. Uzumaki Naruto and Momochi Haku. It had been a day since Naruto and Haku had left wave, and so far, things were looking bright. The sky was crystal blue with some beautiful white clouds floating within the sky. There were no threats, no terror, just the two of them walking down the dirt road as a cool, gentle breeze caused their clothes to flow with it. The sun reflected off of Naruto's wave made hiaite, which read, Wave's Light of Hope, in kanji, which caused him to close his left eye in a wince. Are you okay, Naruto-kun? Haku asked him gently as Naruto rubbed his left eye with a smile on his face. I'm doing alright, Haku-chan, Naruto responded gently, and that was the truth. For all of his existence, he had never seen a sky so clear before without the smell of burning corpses and gunfire in the air. He could hear the birds chirping in the trees and could see the many animals scurrying here and there. Along with the sounds in the sky above, Naruto felt at peace. Something that he had never been in his previous life. Naruto shut his eyes and let a soft laugh leave his lips before he said, I'm doing better than alright, Naruto admitted with a larger smile on his face. It feels so strange to be this happy, Naruto told Haku gently as he looked at her. To smell the nice crisp air around us. To look at the sky and see nothing but blue, and the occasional white. To not have to fear that some force beyond your abilities will come and take your soul. It feels nice, Naruto summarized before he let out another genuine laugh. Haku stared at Naruto and felt a warm feeling in her chest as he laughed. She had heard him and seen him with his guard down many times, but seeing him like this made her heart fill with love for him. Without warning, Haku leaned close and placed a rather gentle kiss on a still laughing Naruto's lips, which caused him to stop laughing before he returned her kiss gladly before the two pulled away and rested their forehead against the other's. What was that for? Naruto whispered softly, slightly dazed from the sudden kiss. Haku merely smiled at this before she murmured, seeing you this happy, you look truly at peace, I guess I couldn't help it. Naruto laughed and asked, well then why stop? Haku giggled softly, moved away from him and responded, because we need to get to the next village. Haku pulled out a map that the kind citizens of Wave had given her and added, which is, Hisako. Haku then tilted her head. Just Hisako. That is strange, a lot of the villages in our world have some grand name but this is just, Hisako. Just strange to me. Naruto quirked a brow at this, gave a small shrug, and then asked, how far is it from our current location? Haku rolled up the map and placed it back into her bag as she answered, it's only a few miles ahead. Naruto smiled and said, then what are we waiting for? Let's get there pronto. Haku nodded and together, the two dashed forward to make their way to this village. After 30 minutes of intense running, the two quickly found themselves approaching the village but as they neared closer, Naruto heard multiple voices sing, Kai Nai Hisako, Hanu no Haka, Indelible Hisako, Tomb of Flame. Naruto immediately skidded to stop, which caused Haku to stop as well. Naruto-kun, what is wrong? Haku asked but Naruto held up his hand to stop her. The faint singing began to fade away but Naruto looked troubled. What in the world was that? I don't know, Naruto responded as he narrowed his eyes. It must be nothing. Let's head to the village as quickly as possible. Something isn't sitting right with me and I'd like to get there before sundown. Haku looked at him in concern before she nodded and just as quickly as they stopped, the two started to trek to the village of Hisako but if they had stayed just a little bit longer, they would have noticed a small green orb floating in where they stood. Spectre, a female disembodied voice whispered gently as the green orb flew after the two shinobi. Uzumaki Naruto and Momochi Haku. It was high noon when Naruto and Haku finally made it to the village and despite the ominous feeling that Naruto had felt previously due to the whisper of the disembodied female, the village itself was very beautiful. All of the buildings, from the houses to the markets to even the town hall were built with gray-colored stones, and near the bottom of the buildings, there were blue-colored stones along with gold-colored stones as well. Each of the stairways of any buildings that had them had gold-colored railings and right where Haku and Naruto had entered, there was a medium-sized spring going from the massive ocean that was in the distance going under the multiple bridges that resided in the building. And all around, the villagers of the village were roaming around with miserable looks on their faces, a stark contrast to how they left the people of Wave after Naruto saved their village. From what Naruto and Haku saw as well, every villager had tan-colored skin, ebony-colored hair, and bright crystal blue eyes and from what it looked like, they all had on the same clothes. The males had on light tan cloth pants with two navy blue stripes at the bottom of the legs of the pants and while they were shirtless, they did wear a light tan cloth vest with blue stripes on both sides of the vest that went from shoulder to the bottom of their vest. The females wore strapless dresses that were also light tan in color and also had two blue stripes near the end of their dress and on their necks was a necklace with multiple colored beads on it. Naruto and Haku looked at each other but it was Haku who said, "This seems strange, it's like we stepped into another world or something." "This entire experience is strange," Naruto responded softly but he couldn't help but frown at the defeated expressions of the villagers and said, "Let's check it out Haku-chan." Haku nodded with a frown on her face before the two started to walk into the streets of the village. At first, the people around them seemed fearful of their presence, almost shrinking away from their line of sight. As they walked down the street, they could hear the faint crying of children coming from different homes, which was making Naruto fume inwardly. If anything pissed Naruto off more was the sound of children and or women crying. It didn't matter what the reason they were crying was but it angered him. It made him want to find the source of their sadness and brutally end it to make them happy. But what Naruto noticed was that the sounds of crying were increasing in sound the closer they got to what they assumed was the middle of town. And once they turned a corner, they saw a large crowd gather with sobbing people. "This explains the crying," Naruto growled, clearly displeased by this turn of events before he turned to Haku and said, "Let's see what is going on so we can end their tears." With a nod from Haku, the two fought through the crowd to get to the front and once they did, Naruto saw a sight that had frozen him to his core. There was a tall shinobi that had fair skin and narrowed, slanted orange eyes, 3 tufts of orange hair on his head, a mohawk of sorts that ran down the middle and 2 similar styled tufts of hair at the side with a scowl of pure disdain on his face. His attire was a beige-colored, sleeveless tunic with the symbol of the sound 4 on the hem and a pair of black, 3/4 length pants that stopped just below his knees. He also wore black, arm warmers, and a necklace that comprised of red circular pieces separating long, metallic pieces with black traditional shinobi sandals with mid-calf leg warmers covered by bandages, and a purple, rope-like belt tied in an inverted bow around his waist. And kneeling on the ground in front of this tank of a shinobi was a woman that was holding a small child in her arms, but Naruto didn't see this large shinobi and the woman and child kneeling before him. No, what he saw was his wife, Hitomi, trying to protect their son. Satoshi as Quan Kai, posing as Sub-Zero, was approaching them with a sword in his hands. And that was when his mind went blank. Village of Hisako. Pav. Momochi Haku. Please Shinobi-san. She didn't know. Haku saw the woman beg, tears falling from the woman's eyes as the fairly large shinobi sneered down at her, his left hand holding a wrapped-up chain whip. It doesn't matter. You all know the rules. Any one of you blue-eyed bitches touch an Oto shinobi, it is punishable by death. The male barked in response, which caused Haku to scowl in anger. I will take her place. Just please don't hurt her. The woman exclaimed, but without warning, the chain whip snapped and the woman's head whipped down, which made Haku and the crowd gasp in horror. Shut your fucking mouth, the shinobi shouted down at the woman, who looked up at him with blood dripping down the right side of her cheek in a steady stream. This is horrible. We need to do something now, Haku whispered as she turned to Naruto, but what she saw made her step back. Instead of the blue eyes of her beloved, a fiery hellish red had taken their place and embers were floating around Naruto's form and his hands were already ignited in hellfire. Naruto-kun, Haku nervously whispered. She had seen Naruto like this when he was in combat a few times, but he always looked calm. As she looked at him now, he looked enraged at the sight, and add in his angry face and the flames that were now coming into existence around his body, he looked truly like someone that just come from hell itself. Just then, Haku's attention was taken off of Naruto as the woman screamed in terror as the two shinobi behind the orange-haired shinobi began to move forward as the large shinobi shouted, "Grab the child and hold this whore down. No one disrespects the rules Oto has made for this piece of trash village." But as she looked back at the woman, who was crawling backward with the child in her grasp to try to get some distance away from the approaching shinobi, but just as they got close, the two were instantly cleaved in half by the Kubikiri Hako. Haku blinked in surprise as she turned her head to where Naruto was, but could only see the remains of Hellfire on the ground, which was now fading away. Haku watched as the bigger shinobi took a step back in surprise as Naruto stood before the woman, his entire body glowing with the power of Hellfire. Haku was surprised at this. She didn't even see him move from the spot next to her. Haku watched as the loud shinobi bared his teeth and shouted, "How dare you interfere in my affairs? Don't you know who I am? I'm Nanman no Jirobo, the strongest member of the shinobi Yanin Shu." Haku watched as Naruto stabbed her father's blade into the ground in front of the woman and child before he turned to Jirobo and hissed, "I will see you burn." Jirobo smirked at this and said, "You think killing two of my men and having that scary aura is going to scare me? You're foolish to stick up for that blue-eyed whore and her bitch child. And I'm going to make you regret it." Oto Nins. 12 shinobi suddenly surrounded Naruto, all of them wearing the same hiate that Jirobo was donning. "Now kill him," Jirobo shouted as he pointed at Naruto. Naruto leapt up and kneed the head of the first shinobi, sending them both to the ground, while Haku immediately dashed from the crowd and launched several senbon at the second shinobi, who instantly dropped to the ground. Naruto kicked a shinobi in the chest and used the man's chest as a springboard to launch himself into the air. While in the air, Naruto instantly coasted his right hand back and shouted, "Come here." Naruto lunged his hand forward, allowing the two thick streams of hellfire to shoot from his hand and through the head of one of the shinobi. Naruto landed on his feet and tugged the chain, ripping the head off of the shinobi before he grabbed the spine of the removed head and swung the head, if it was a mace, into the head of the shinobi to his left before he used a kunai to stab a third shinobi in the neck before he ripped it out and stabbed it right between the eyes of the fourth shinobi. Meanwhile, Haku deflected several kunai that were thrown at her and quickly threw 5 senbon, with 3 of the 5 hitting one shinobi in the forehead while the remaining 2 hit the neck of the second. Haku then dashed forward to the 3 shinobi that were heading towards her, ducked the right hook of the first shinobi, and stabbed his neck with 2 senbon. She launched 4 more into the face of the second shinobi before she leapt up and wrapped her legs around the shoulder of the third one and stabbed 5 kunai through the head of the final shinobi. Naruto and Haku then turned their head to Jirobo, who scowled and said, "Well, it seems you two have some skill, but that won't be enough to stop me, Nanman no Jiro." Before Haku could blink, Naruto disappeared from beside her with an explosion of hellfire, and seconds later, Naruto appeared before the large shinobi in a burst of hellfire in a crouch with a kunai in his left hand. Without any hesitation, the kunai ripped through the stomach of Jirobo, much to his silent horror. She watched as Naruto twisted the kunai in his hand and sliced the neck of Jirobo, sending blood splattering across Naruto's face. Haku saw the horrified look on Jirobo's face as blood poured from the grievous wounds Naruto just inflicted, but then she saw it. A flicker of purple chakra appeared underneath his tunic on his left shoulder, but as she opened her mouth to tell Naruto this, Naruto's glowing hands grabbed Jirobo's head and exclaimed, "Now burn, Nanman no Jirobo." Haku watched as hellfire began to burn brightly around Naruto's hands until the flame covered Jirobo's head, and with a loud roar, Naruto ripped off the head of the large shinobi before Naruto dropped the burning head to the ground, which then continued to burn until it was ashes on the ground. Haku was stunned by the brutality that Naruto had shown, but she wasn't surprised by it either. He had killed Gato rather suddenly as well after all, and considering his sudden burst of wrath at what he saw, she should have known he wouldn't waste any time in striking the shinobi down. Haku watched as the hellfire aura faded away from Naruto's form as he stood there silently, his eyes now returning to the blue she had come to love. Without any hesitation, Haku ran towards Naruto, stood, and placed her hands on his cheeks. Naruto looked at her for a moment before she placed a gentle kiss on his lips, telling him wordlessly that it was okay. Naruto returned her kiss briefly before he suddenly heard the loud cheer coming from the crowd around the two of them, which made the two flinch in surprise. Without warning, the entire crowd came pouring towards them with hopeful and happy expressions on their faces as they hoisted Naruto and Haku up into the air while they repeatedly chanted what sounded like, "Thank you." But as Naruto and Haku were being cheered and crowd surfing, Naruto noticed something. In the corner of his eyes, he could see the shadow of someone watching them from the roof with glowing orange eyes before they turned away and disappeared. Who was that? Naruto thought to himself with a frown on his face. Naruto and Haku were then led around by a group of people everywhere in the village. From the food markets to showering the two shinobi in countless gifts. It seemed as if they were celebrities in the village due to the many amount of people who came to thank them for defeating that villain. Both Naruto and Haku were amazed at how kind these villagers were to them, and the two shinobi felt gratitude for all that they were doing. But as the group of people swarmed around them, leading them to the village's local inn, Naruto heard Haku whisper, "This is amazing, Naruto-kun." "I certainly agree," Naruto replied, his eyes taking note of the hopeful, almost desperate expressions on the faces of the adults that led them on. After being led to the inn, both Naruto and Haku gave their thanks to the large group of people before entering the building, who all bowed once more before the two entered the inn. Village of Hisako Hotel. Pav. Uzumaki Naruto and Momochi Haku. Once the two entered the hotel, the two walked to the front desk of the inn to see a tan-colored girl with an orange clip in her short, spiky mint green hair, short sleeveless white midriff shirt with fishnet armor underneath, long white armlets, and fishnet shorts with a short white apron skirt over it, and the girl was currently sleeping soundly with her arm propping her face up as she slept. Naruto and Haku exchanged a glance before Haku tapped the small silver bell. The girl jarred awake, her orange eyes darting around in alarm before they settled on the bemused Naruto and Haku. Oh, I'm so sorry," she apologized. "It's quite alright," Haku said with a small smile on her face. The girl sighed in relief and said, "My boss would kill me if he found out I was sleeping on the job again. Anyway. Welcome to Hisako Inn. My name is Fu, how can I help you?" "What a strange girl," Naruto thought before he chuckled and said, "Hello, my name is Uzumaki Naruto and this is Momochi Haku and we need a room for the night." Fu nodded and leaned down behind the desk before she leaned up and handed them a key and said, "Last door on the right side of the hallway down the hall over there." Haku grabbed the key from Fu's hand and noticed the Hi-8 ite that was tied to the girl's upper arm. Haku gave it a brief nod while she said, "Thank you, Fu-san. I noticed by your clothes that you aren't from around here." Fu nodded and replied, "That's right. I'm originally from Takigakure no Sato." My old village didn't like me all too much, so my adopted family managed to get me out of there when things got dicey, so I've been traveling ever since. Well, until I found this place. Everyone is so kind here. I'm honestly not used to it, and while things have gotten pretty bad, everyone is still kind, which is what we need nowadays. Fu then looked at Haku's scratched hiaite and said, "You're a nuke nin, I see." From Kiri, Fu then whistled at this implication and said, "That must have been quite an adventure escaping from their hunter nin, considering the rumors of the bloody mist." Fu then looked to Naruto and noticed the kanji etched in his hiaite and commented, "Waves Light of Hope, that's a new one." "Well, it's a special one," Naruto responded with a small smile on his face. "Well, you must have done something great to have gotten it," Fu noted before she gave out a small laugh. "Well, enough gabbing out of me, you guys must be exhausted. If you need anything, I'll be here." "Much appreciated," Naruto and Haku said in unison with a smile on their face before the two of them made their way to the room. But as the two walked down the hall, Naruto stopped mid-step when he heard the faint song near his ear. Kai Nai Hisako, Kai Nai Urami, Indelible Hisako, Indelible Grudge. Yakusatsu, Yakusatsu no Higeki, Slaughter, Massacre of Tragedy. Kai Nai Hisako, Shugo Sha, Indelible Hisako, our guardian. Naruto turned his head and noticed Fu's head leaning forward before slumping to the desk, falling back asleep, and quickly realizing that she wasn't the one that was singing. How bizarre, Naruto thought with a frown on his face, his eyes narrowed in thought. Where was it coming from? "Haku-chan, did you hear that?" Naruto asked her as he turned to her. Haku tilted her head to listen for a moment before she shook her head, which made Naruto frown in annoyance and said, "Strange." "Why? What is wrong?" Haku questioned. "It's nothing," Naruto replied with an unsure tone before he shook his head, unlocked the door to their room, and held the door open for Haku. Once Haku passed, Naruto shut the door and looked around. The room was as normal as Tsunami's guest room. 2 queen-sized beds, nice floral printed wallpaper, and a nightstand with a lamp on it. "I'm going to take a quick bath," Haku told Naruto as she made her way to the bathroom. "Understood," Naruto stated as he removed his shirt, to reveal an orange tank top underneath it. As he removed his old orange jacket from he noticed something on the wooden window frame. It was a folded-up pink paper, hanging from a kunai. Naruto walked towards the window, pulled the kunai out of the wood frame, and looked down at it before he unfolded the note and began to read. "Dear Shinobi-san, I saw how you defended that poor woman against that brute of a shinobi, and I thank you so much for killing him. Nanman no Jirobo was a cruel person to the villagers, and I'm forever in your debt. But sadly, he is not the only one of his kind here. This village is in dire need of help from brave shinobi, and after what you have done, we feel that you too will be able to help me save this village from these invaders. There are many shinobi from Odogakure no Sato that have invaded this village and have taken their mayor and his family hostage for whatever their sick plans are, and I fear that they will kill each and every one in the village once they get whatever they desire. I cannot let that happen. Help me save these people and I will assist you in all that I can. Sincerely, Kage no Chome." By the time Naruto finished reading the note, Haku came out of the bathroom with a white towel around her body, modestly covering up her nayness, but she could immediately see the angered look on Naruto's face. "Naruto-kun?" Haku questioned, concerned at why he was angry. Naruto turned his head to look at her, subtly enjoying the sight of the nearly gnawed kunoichi before he handed her the note he had found stashed away in his old jacket. Haku took the paper and read it over while Naruto walked to the window with crossed arms and said, "No wonder they were so nice to us after I killed Jirobo, apparently, they are under siege by this Oto." Once Haku finished the note, Haku merely chuckled and said, "It sounds like we have another village to save." Naruto narrowed his eyes in thought and replied, "Yeah, but we'll need to do more investigating before we just fight everyone in our path. We are likely to meet our ends if we do that." Haku walked behind Naruto, slipped her arms around his waist, placed her lips against his neck, and murmured, "Then we shall, but for now, let's get some rest, okay?" Naruto turned to Haku, gave her a smile, and answered, "Yes, let's get some shut-eye." Naruto didn't know where he was. The last thing he remembered when he closed his eyes was Haku's beautiful face, and now he was standing in a field of flowers. The petals from the flowers floated in the gentle breeze around him, which caused him to close his eyes to enjoy the sweet smell of the flowers that were carried in the gentle breeze that overcame him until he opened his eyes and saw a teenage girl standing a few feet away, her back turned to him. Her long black hair flowed against the breeze, revealing her pale skin and her tattered rose-pink kimono with white flower decals and a red obi sash around her waist flowed against the breeze as well. Naruto noticed that the bottom of the kimono was torn off at the knees and the top of the kimono hung loose around her shoulders. Naruto also noticed that her feet were bare and caked with mud and dirt, and on her left hand, she was wearing some sort of golden trinket. Spectre, come, the female said, her voice gentle, but with a tone of sadness within it. Naruto felt himself walking towards the female until he stood to her left and that's when he saw it. It was the village of Hisako, but all the villagers looked so happy, compared to how they looked before. This was once my home, the girl started to say. It was my world. I lived in peace here, but then they came. They plundered and murdered my family, all cut down. I fought them, tore them asunder, but I died in the end. Despite being next to her, Naruto was unable to see her face at all, but he could hear the pain in her voice. I have protected this village from those that wish to harm it and its inhabitants for centuries, but now more have come, and they have stolen from the grave of my family. But why? Naruto asked her. The female lowered her head and through her bangs, Naruto could see flickers of green energy within her deep and sunken eyes. Suddenly, the field of flowers suddenly became a field of flames and Naruto soon found himself standing across from the female, but now her skin was a sickly gray and she was hunched over. A faint aura of darkness around her that resembled ashes and embers, similar to his own, and her body was slightly jittering as if she was struggling to remain in and out of this plane. They are destroying my home, they are killing these people I have fought to protect and have taken my most precious possession. Find my possession, Hisashi Hanzo. Find it and bring it to my shrine so I can kill them all, the apparition said, her body jittering rapidly before she took a step and suddenly, she was before Naruto, which caused him to instantly step back in alarm. Bring me my possession to save them, Uzumaki Naruto. She shouted, her mouth opening wide, revealing the rows of her sharp teeth. Village of Hisako. Pav. Uzumaki Naruto. With a gasp, Naruto woke up, his body soaked with sweat, his breaths coming out in quick pants. Naruto looked around and saw that Haku was sound asleep, seemingly unaware of the intense nightmare that had just taken place. That dream, who was that apparition? Naruto asked himself before he shook his head and wiped the sweat off of his face, but as he laid back down with Haku, he heard it. Kai nai Hisako, Kai nai Urami, indelible Hisako, indelible grudge. Yakusatsu, Yakusatsu no Higeki, slaughter, massacre of tragedy. Kai nai Hisako, Shugo Sha, indelible Hisako, our guardian. Naruto's eyes widened as he listened to the faint song that was playing in his ear. Ryukatsu, Ryukatsu no Gakido, bloody, bloody rage. Sakebu, Sakebu, Shugo Sha, weep, weep, our guardian. Ryukatsu, Ryukatsu no Gakido, bloody, bloody rage. Kai nai Hisako, Kai nai Urami, indelible Hisako, indelible grudge. It was singing about Hisako, but it wasn't about the village. I have protected this village from those that wish to harm it and its inhabitants for centuries, the female voice echoed in his mind as Naruto sat there in the bed, the gears turning in his head. That had to be the case. Whatever was happening with this village, it was causing unrest with that apparition. But what? Naruto let out a sigh. He just had so many questions about what was going on in this village. From the Oto shinobi he had killed to the intense nightmare in the form of that female that saw him as both Hisashi Hanzo and Uzumaki Naruto. Perhaps that girl he and Haku met earlier would be able to tell him something about this village and maybe even the girl herself. Naruto turned to Haku and placed a small kiss on her forehead before he slid out from beneath her, silently slipped on his shinobi sandals, and walked out of the room. Naruto walked down the hall of the inn and noticed that Fu was still at her desk, but instead of dozing off like she had before when he first saw her, she was focused on a few pieces of paper in front of her. What was she doing? Despite all of his changes, Naruto couldn't fight the curiosity that was burning in him, and with a small chuckle, he walked to the desk and asked, Fu-san, got a minute? Fu blinked rapidly before she smiled at Naruto and replied, ah, I wasn't expecting you to need me so soon, Naruto-san. How can I help you? Need ice, room service, flowers for the pretty lady. I shouldn't assume that you need all of that stuff. You know what they say about assuming, makes an is out of you and me. Naruto noticed Fu putting the papers into her desk quickly as she talked before she laughed a bit and said, "There I go being a chatterbox again, sorry about that." Naruto chuckled and shook his head at the girl. "It's no problem at all," Naruto responded with a dismissive wave of his hand. "But tell me something, these Odo shinobi that's in this village, do you know anything about them?" Fu shook her head and sighed. "Not at all, unfortunately," Fu answered. "They just appeared out of nowhere and went straight to the mayor's place. Next thing we know, we're captive under them. So they just appeared out of nowhere?" Naruto asked with a confused look on his face. Fu nodded, leaned in her chair, and answered, "Yeah. It was sudden and none of us saw it coming, but I've investigated them." "Why do you ask?" "Well, I had to kill a few earlier that were abusing some of the villagers and decided that I would help them clear these trash out, but I need to know more about them," Naruto answered, not wanting to tell her about the note just yet. "So you know nothing about them?" Fu nodded, a serious look on her face. "I know of them due to my travels around the shinobi world. I know that they are a cruel and evil bunch that has either wiped out small villages or forced them to swear allegiance to them." Naruto couldn't help but let a scowl form on his face after Fu's words. "I knew someone like that. He would twist your soul around until you bowed to him. I hate people that try to force things on others." "As do I," Fu said softly, her eyes telling a story that Naruto could not decipher just yet. "I see, then we have something in common," Naruto said with a smile on his face, which Fu returned with her own smile. "I guess we do," she responded. "You should be resting. It's like 3 in the morning. You should be as well," Naruto noted with a chuckle as he leaned forward on the desk and added, "Besides, I can't really sleep." "Nightmares?" Fu asked him, which Naruto nodded in response. "Something like that," Naruto responded before he remembered why he came here in the first place. "Tell me something," Naruto started. "How did this village get its name?" Fu looked at him for a moment and then said with a dejected tone, "Aw crap, I can't remember that at all." Naruto leaned away and crossed his arms as he said, "I see." Fu's eyebrows narrowed in thought for a moment before a look of realization appeared on her face. "Wait, I'll be right back," Fu suddenly shouted before she got out of her chair and quickly darted to the door behind her where she quickly opened it and went inside. After a few minutes of waiting, Naruto watched as Fu came out with a book and placed it on the desk, and said, "When I first came here, before those damn Odo shinobi, the owner of this hotel gave it to me to learn." "How come?" Naruto curiously asked. "Well, I have to learn the history of this village as a part of my test to become a permanent resident here," Fu explained with a smile on her face. "You want to become a permanent resident, of this village?" Naruto asked, a little surprised by this fact. Fu nodded and said, "I've been to a lot of places and this place has been the only village that has ever welcomed me so warmly. They don't care that I look different to them or about a few other things about me, it feels like home. Why wouldn't I want to stay?" Naruto nodded in understanding. He had felt the same way about Wave when he was there, it was more of a home to him than Konoha ever was. Konoha. This was the first time the name of his village had popped into his head since his time in Wave. He promised Kakashi that he would return to Konoha, but it felt like such a lifetime ago that Naruto had been there, and yet he found himself missing Wave far more than he missed Konoha, and when he thought of home, he thought of Wave more than Konoha. Did he truly want to return? Naruto was taken out of his thoughts when Fu said, "Well, let's crack this bad boy open so we could learn some stuff." Naruto nodded and walked over to Fu's side as she opened a very large book. The teal-haired girl flipped through a few pages before she exclaimed, "Aha!" "What?" Naruto asked. "Here it is, the history of Hisako village. This village is apparently centuries old and was founded by Seika Kagome, who found it and rehabilitated it to be livable. During her rehabilitation, however, Seika Kagome found the destroyed shrine with the words, Hisako, along with a scroll that was hanging from a naginata on it that told the tale of Hisako the Guardian." "Hisako the Guardian," Naruto repeated while he crossed his arms with narrowed eyes. Yeah, it has the tale that was in the scroll in here, Fu explained as she narrowed her eyes at the book. Read it, all of it, Naruto commanded with an urgent tone in his voice. Fu looked at Naruto for a moment before she looked down at the book and began to read. Decades ago, there was a female teenage girl. She was the eldest daughter of a ronin, a samurai without a leader. For her father's shogun had been assassinated by a rival, and the girl's father had returned to the village of his birth to start a family and become a farmer, Fu read. Being descended from a famous Onabugaisha, a female samurai, the girl's father felt that it was his duty to train his eldest daughter in the arts of war. The times were dangerous with many warring clans, renegade shoguns, and bandits on the roads, and every member of the village needed to be capable of bearing arms in case of invasion. Around his neck, he always wore a strip of red cloth torn from his late shogun's battle banner in remembrance of him. The girl became adept with sword and bow, but her weapon of choice was the naginata, a long pole with a blade on one end. It was the same weapon that her ancestor had used, and it was good for keeping the enemy at bay as well as unseating horsemen. Her father told her that she would inherit the naginata upon his death, but he gave her a ninja's weapon called the Nekote, the cat's claw. Nekote, Naruto repeated to himself. Fu nodded and said, it's a gold blade that fits over a finger and could be laced with poison. Apparently, the girl was to use this if any man ever tried to abduct her. Naruto's mind flashed back to the female from his nightmare and he remembered seeing a golden trinket on her hand. Was this the Nekote? When the girl wasn't training, she worked diligently in the fields side by side with the men and women of the village, Fu continued. But every action she performed was done with the intention of practicing her military planting of a rice shoot was the same as the downward motion of a katana sword thrust. The pulling of a weed mimicked a defensive naginata maneuver. One day a traveling theatrical group came to the village and performed a puppet show called The Story of the Ghost Wife, the tale of a woman who died and then came back from the dead only to murder her husband's new bride by ripping off her head. The ghost wife's puppet scared the girl with its pale skin and long wild black hair. For years afterward, she had nightmares about it. Ironic, Naruto thought to himself but tuned in when Fu continued on. When she was about to turn 19, a young aristocrat passed by the village on horseback, Fu read. He saw the girl fetching water from the river and instantly wanted her, teasing her about her mud-caked feet. He tossed a beaded prayer bracelet on the ground and mockingly asked her to marry him, but the girl laughed in his face. She wanted to be a samurai, not somebody's housekeeper. Especially not for a prissy-looking oaf like him. The wealthy young man, the son of a vicious renegade shogun, became angry and drew his sword, and so the girl knocked him off his horse with her bucket, and beat him soundly. The humiliated man jumped on his mount and rode away from the village in shame, and the girl continued her training with renewed vigor. She wore the prayer bead bracelet to remind herself to never marry a fool. A week after her 19th birthday, when all of the fruit tree blossoms had fallen and covered the ground like a white carpet, she was training in this spot when she caught her kimono on a sharp piece of bamboo. She ripped off the entire bottom part of the kimono so that she wouldn't trip on it, and continued until twilight when she became aware that the air was thick with smoke. She sprinted out of the forest and across the fields toward the village. It was on fire, and there were armed horsemen everywhere. Naruto was getting a bad feeling about where this story was heading. She reached into the folds of her robe and slipped on her poisoned cat's claw, and once she got closer, that the invaders had slain many of the villagers, Fu read, immediately confirming Naruto's bad feeling. The girl ran toward her house, turned a corner, and came face to face with a sight that made her knees buckle. Her mother, grandmother, and two younger siblings lay dead, piled on top of each other like butchered animals, their clothes slashed and their blood staining the stones of the street. And there was her father's corpse nearby. His head had been cut off, and the red strip of battle banner that he had always worn around his neck lay at her feet. She picked it up with a trembling hand. The girl's heart broke in that instant, and then it turned to a lump of burning coal inside her breast. Hey, you okay? Fu asked with concern. Naruto's eyes had narrowed in anger and his eyes were flashing from blue to fiery red-orange, but he managed to calm himself when he saw Fu's own eyes looking at him in concern and replied. Yeah, this is just hitting too close to home, that's all. Fu looked at Naruto and said, I can stop if you w. Don't. Naruto interrupted. Keep going, please. Fu obeyed the request as she looked down at the book and read. She grabbed her father's naginata, pulling it from his dead hands, then charged the horsemen, screaming at them, calling them cowards, and ripping them apart like a force of nature. Positioning herself between the warriors and some buildings where many of the village children were being held, she fought with inhuman endurance, slaying a dozen of the attackers before succumbing to her own wounds and collapsing on the ground. The last thing that she saw in this world was a young man's face grinning at her, the man whom she had spurned by the river. With her dying effort, she swiped her cat's claw across his cheek, and then she died with his screams of anguish echoing in her ears. But the girl had not passed in vain. Her act of bravery against overwhelming odds rallied the surviving villagers to fight back, and they drove the soldiers out of the village, shooting many of them dead with arrows as they fled. Once the fight was over, the remaining survivors of the village cremated the girl with her family, carefully removing the bones from the ashes with chopsticks and placing them in clay urns, and buried them deep away to keep them protected from outside parties. And while many of them didn't know her name, they called her Hisako, meaning everlasting child, due to her dying when she was 19 years old. Once they were done, they built a shrine for her, to which they regularly made small offerings, burning incense and offering prayers to the brave spirit of the young woman who had saved them from being wiped out. Fu took a breath and read. Seika Kagome was touched by this tale of Hisako and rehabilitated the shrine as well and left that area of town alone in honor of the fallen guardian of this currently unnamed village. A few days later, this village was attacked by some samurai, and many of those who fought swore that they saw a teenage girl with muddy feet and a torn kimono wielding a naginata with a red ribbon fighting against the invaders. This rallied the villagers to fight, and eventually, they managed to drive off the invaders. Seika Kagome, realizing that the tale was true, then renamed the village Hisako, in her honor, to thank her for her sacrifice and for protecting our home, and since this time, whenever this village was in danger, the spirit of Hisako the guardian would appear to protect us all. Hisako will always and forever be welcome as our guardian. Seika Carry. When Fu finished, she closed the book and said, "This was last updated 12 years ago by Seika Carry, the daughter of Seika Kagome." Shit, that was heavy to read, Naruto agreed with a nod. Hisako, you and I are more alike than I have thought, but while you protect these people, I became a monster in return, Naruto thought with a sullen tone before he shook his head and said, so it was named after this tale, which seems to be true. But if this tale was true, Hisako would have been here to stop Oto. If it is true, I wonder why she hasn't appeared, Fu said curiously. Naruto was unsure for a moment as well until he remembered her words. Find my possession Hisashi Hanzo. Find it and bring it to my shrine so I can kill them all. Could it be that her possession that was missing was the cause of her not showing up? And if that was the case, she wanted him to find it, but where could he even begin? Wait, Fu, where is this shrine they speak of? Naruto asked her with a quirked brow. Fu narrowed her eyes in thought for a moment before she said, I don't know, but maybe the elder of the village knows. Perhaps he could help you when he awakens. Can you tell me where he is located? Naruto asked her. Fu smiled and said, his home is located a few houses away from here. When day breaks, I can sneak out and lead you to him. Naruto smiled. Village of Hisako, Mayor's Mansion. Pav. Hokuman no Tayuya. Man, Jirobo is taking a long as time with the food. Tayuya let out an aggravated sigh as she lay on the nice clean white couch beneath her. I knew we shouldn't have sent that fat ass anywhere. He's probably out chasing some tail on some shit like that, Tayuya spat with annoyance. Kidomaru rolled his eyes at Tayuya and said, shut up over there. You bitching about him won't bring him back faster. You're the one whining about him not bringing the food. Tayuya shouted as she rose up from her prone position, anger in her eyes. Enough, Kimimaro said with authority in his voice, causing both Kidomaru and Tayuya to quiet down. We should be more concerned about the mission that Orochimaru-sama sent us on than food. Tayuya scowled at the white-haired Kayuga, spat on the floor then responded, just because you can survive with Orochimaru-sama's COC in your mouth doesn't mean we should join you for the messy deep-throat buffet. Kimimaro narrowed his eyes while Kidomaru, Ukin, and Sakin snorted in amusement. We need real food and the fatso hasn't come back yet and the mayor and his bitches can't feed us while he's dead. And we maxed out all the food in that fat ass's fridge already. And again, we need food to be able to have energy to complete the mission in the first fucking place. The food will come, Kimimaro responded. Your food source maybe, Tayuya muttered with a roll of her eyes. Kimimaro turned around and said, I do not know why Orochimaru-sama is looking at you for the next candidate for the cursed seal, but he obviously has chosen a poor candidate for it. Tayuya rose up from the couch and walked up to Kimimaro and hissed, Listen here, cum dumpster, how dare yo. Just then, an Oto shinobi came bursting into the living room of the mansion where the Otogakure no Shinobi Gonenshu stayed and said, Kimimaro-sama, there is an emergency in the village. Jirobo-sama was killed. The 4 shinobi in the room looked at the Oto shinobi in shock. Say that again. Jirobo was killed. Uken asked the Oto nin, who nodded. Tayuya began to laugh hard at this, causing the other shinobi to look at her. Oh wow. The fat ass bit the dust. That is fucking hilarious. So who beat him? Some lady accidentally tossing a donut to him and him choking on it. Tayuya, enough, Kidomaru responded. How did it happen? Well, Jirobo-sama was being cruel to a woman whose child had bumped into him, the shinobi began, which caused Tayuya to scoff immediately, but she remained silent as the shinobi continued. Jirobo-sama told the shinobi he was with to take the child when this boy with bright blonde hair and furious-looking orange-red eyes came and cleaved them in half with the kubikiri hako. That got Kimimaro's attention immediately. Everyone knew that the kubikiri hako belonged to Momochi Zabuza, so whoever this kid was to be wielding that blade was not to be messed with. This kid and some girl that was with him slaughtered the shinobi, and before Jirobo-sama could do anything, the kid stabbed through his stomach, then sliced up his chest, and finally took off his head and burned it in fire, all with a kunai. The room was quiet as the Otogakure no Shinobi Gonenshu absorbed what had happened to one of their own, but Kimimaro was the first one to snap out of this and said, We need to kill this person immediately. Who knows if he will interfere with Orochimaru-sama's goals, Kidomaru, Tayuya. Tayuya and the 6-armed teen looked at Kimimaro. I want you both to take 10 shinobi from the shrine to hunt these people down and kill them, Kimimaro commanded. Sakin, Uken, and I will go to the shrine to retrieve that Naginata that Orochimaru-sama sent us here for. Gotcha, Kidomaru responded, but Tayuya remained silent. Something felt wrong and Tayuya didn't know why. Bring me my possession to save them, Uzumaki Naruto. Naruto opened his eyes at the voice of Hisako echoing in his mind and felt himself frown a bit. After his talk with Fu, Naruto went to sleep with a plan to save this village. But once again throughout his time sleeping, Hisako had returned to his mind and repeated what she had told him before, and now he was wide awake. Luckily enough, it was now sunrise and he actually felt fully rested. Naruto looked down and stared down at Haku's sleeping form and felt a gentle smile tug at his lips. She looked so peaceful, so pure, it reminded him of a gentle snowfall in his village during his time as Hisashi Hanzo. Naruto caressed Haku's cheek and whispered, How can someone as pure as you be with someone as damned as I? Naruto let a soft sigh escape his lips and withdrew his hand before he slipped out of bed and made his way to the bathroom to freshen up for this new day of investigation. After stripping away his clothes, Naruto turned on the shower, stepped inside of it, and let the soothing hot water cascade down his body. So far, his search to find himself really was strangely going well. While he was still prone to extreme violence, it seems more that it was triggered when there was injustice being done before him instead of all the time. Was that part of being a good guy? Naruto chuckled and shut his eyes. Him a good guy. It seemed so laughable, and yet, all he had done was commit good deeds with his violent Hellfire, but was it enough? Was it enough to balance out all of the dark, cruel things he had done during his time under the leash of Quan Kai? No, Naruto said softly. Nothing could make up for the atrocities I have done as his pawn, but then his mind went back to Haku, as well as Kotoha and the others in Wave, and he felt a smile form on his face. He may feel that nothing could make up for what he had done as Scorpion, but at least he made a damn good start. A few minutes later, Naruto walked out of the bathroom and quickly got dressed before he glanced at Haku's sleeping form. He and Fu were supposed to meet with the elder of the village to find out where to find Hisako's grave to continue the investigation, and as much as he wanted to wake up Haku and get her ready, He didn't want to waste any time, so after he kissed the sleeping Kunoichi's cheek, Naruto left the room after sparing one last look to her and shut the door softly. Naruto walked down the hallway and met with Fu, who was slipping on her orange bag and said, "Good morning, Fu-san." Fu gave him a bright smile and greeted, "Good morning, Naruto-san. Are you ready to go?" Naruto nodded and together, the two quickly walked out of the hotel building. Village of Wave. Pav. Haruno Sakura. What the hell? The Great Uzumaki Festival. Sakura couldn't help but grin as Ino and the rest of her team stared at the village in shock. It may have been a few days since she had been here, but the village had taken such a different turn. Before, Wave was barely standing and everyone seemed so depressed, so defeated. But now, everything looked brighter and all of the villagers seemed happier, but there was another difference. Hanging from the walls of many buildings, orange streamers with tons of orange and navy blue confetti fell all around them and all around the village. There were villagers laughing, dancing, and singing, all of them wearing an orange and blue headband around their foreheads. What kind of bizarre world did we just step into? Ino asked with a confused tone in her voice. Sakura didn't answer her due to noticing many pictures of her teammate. Some of them had her, Sasuke, and Kakashi in them, while others had Naruto and Haku in them, but many of them had Naruto with various people. The strange part was that there were pictures of him before the bridge incident. She had somehow gotten used to seeing the new Naruto that she was jarred at seeing his old look. Back when our hotness was super cute, inner Sakura claimed, but she didn't yell. She sounded wistful at the sight of the chubby-cheeked Uzumaki feeding a small red-haired child with Haku. The Great Naruto Bridge. What the fuck? Kiba shouted in alarm, only for Sakura to grin when Kurenai's hand smacked the back of his head, which made the Inuzuka shriek in surprise. Beside her, she saw Hinata gazing up at the picture of Naruto standing before Zabuza as rain fell from above, and she could see the huge blush on Hinata's face. Sakura couldn't help but admire the look of fierceness on Naruto's face as he stared down Zabuza, but as Hinata frowned at the sight of Haku, Sakura did as well. We really screwed the pooch not going after him, didn't we? Inner Sakura asked softly, which made Sakura shake her head. No, we didn't screw up, Sakura said vocally to herself before she walked up to Hinata and said, I know, it's hard to tell that he's changed so much. Hinata shook her head and replied, no, I can tell it's him. Even though his face changed, his eyes remained the same, although, something else about how he looks, it seems familiar to me. Sakura watched as Hinata placed her hand on the image of Naruto, and as she traced his jawline, she said, I see Naruto-kun, but at the same time, I see someone else. What do you see? Sakura asked in confusion. Sakura saw how focused Hinata looked as she said, a lost soul molded by Hellfire itself. Sakura saw Hinata wince in pain as she clenched her eyes shut and held her hands to the sides of her head. Hinata-san, are you okay? Sakura asked as she placed her hand on Hinata's left forearm. Hinata remained silent for a moment before she answered, I'm okay, I just didn't get a lot of rest. Okay, but what did you mean about Naruto-kun? Sakura asked curiously, but Hinata shook her head and removed her hand from Naruto's image. It is nothing, Hinata replied before she said, just rambling, Sakura-san. I'll be alright. But Sakura could hear the distant tone in Hinata's voice, but she didn't question it. A few seconds later, Shikamaru came from behind the two and said, Man, Sakura-san. It's like they made him a deity. I believed you before, but I really believe you now. Yeah, it's really strange. Did the villagers forget that we were here too? Sakura asked with a humorous tone in her voice. She didn't care so much for the glory, and while she felt that the village was getting a little out of hand with the love for Naruto, she felt that Naruto deserved the love and respect the village gave him. Something Konoha didn't. I agree as well, Shino said, which caused Sakura to jump due to him randomly appearing beside her. This place seems to idolize him like we do our cages. It is fascinating to see. Hinata nodded and said, It truly is. Our village despises Naruto-kun to the point of wanting him dead, but it's truly the opposite here. I mean, look at all the pictures of him. I even see that they are starting to build a statue of him. Sakura blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, what? Sakura asked in confusion. Hinata pointed to the middle of the village where Neji, Tenten, and Lee were standing. In where they stood, there was a sign that said, the hero of Wave, Uzumaki Naruto, and while there was no statue yet, there was a large stone pillar in the spot where the statue would be. The four genin walked to Team Guy, and as they walked up, Sakura heard Neji tell Lee and Tenten, "How can this be? Naruto was the failure in the class when we were his classmates, how can this be possible? None of this should be possible." His flames of youth were burning out of control, Lee responded with a wide grin on his face. "Truly we should all be like Naruto-kun." Tenten chuckled at the excitable Lee and said, "Still, it's odd to think that Naruto made such a huge impact here. It seems what Hinata-san told us was true after all." Neji remained staring at the spot and softly repeated, "How can this be?" It was as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing, but Sakura frowned at him. "What makes this hard to believe to you, Neji-san?" Sakura asked curiously as she looked at him in thought. He was a failure. Destiny had deemed him a failure. And yet, Neji blinked and rubbed his face before he turned around and stomped away angrily, leaving the rest of genin to watch him leave. What in the world was that all about? Shikamaru asked as he placed his hands behind his head. Village of Wave. Pav. Hataki Kakashi. Kami. Kakashi breathed out in awe. This place had gone full Naruto mania and they were only gone for a week and a half. Kakashi then chuckled and thought to himself, this place is what Konoha should be for him. Celebrating his achievements instead of trying to hold him down. Kakashi turned to Anko and saw that she was now wearing an orange jacket, which was similar to Naruto's jacket, as well as holding a small doll made in Naruto's image and some orange-colored cotton candy, and she had a large grin on her face. I got to say, this village may be super strange in throwing their love into a genin, but fuck, it looks awesome, Anko said to Kakashi, clearly pleased. Amused, Kakashi stated, I see you are enjoying yourself, while he crossed his arms. Anko bobbed her head and said, you kidding me? When you told me all that happened, even I had my grain of salt, but seeing all of this and seeing how happy these folks are, I can see why he opted to stay. Asuma, who decided to butt into the conversation, said, Kakashi, there has to be something we're missing. Truly that story you fed us cannot be true. And why couldn't it? Anko asked with a frown on her face. Look at this village. Look at everyone laughing and singing. Look at all the celebrations. Look at the streamers and colors and all of the pictures of the kid. Gee, don't you think it looks legit? Asuma rolled his eyes and said, they act as if he is the Hokage here. And he is nothing but a mere genin. Hell, we've all saved villages and yet we never got this type of ovation. Doesn't this all seem bizarre to any of you? Kakashi opened his mouth to speak when a rather familiar voice said from behind him, if I hadn't fought him myself, I would have agreed with you, Sarutobi Asuma. The three quickly turned around to see a stern-looking Momochi Zabuza standing with his arms crossed along with Tsunami beside him with a welcoming smile on her face. Zabuza was currently wearing a gray tank top and black shinobi pants, but his arms, neck, and half of his face were hidden by medical wrap. What was most telling was that Zabuza wasn't wearing his Hi-8 ite as he had been during their bout, and his famous blade was also missing from his person. Kakashi then looked towards Tsunami and wondered why she was standing beside the fearsome shinobi, looking very comfortable with his presence. Zabuza-san, what are you still doing here? Kakashi asked nonchalantly, both of his hands in his pocket. Hey, this woman here refuses to let me leave until my injuries heal, Zabuza stated while motioning his head to Tsunami, who turned to him and gave a soft laugh. That's right. You shouldn't even be out of bed, Momochi-kun, but you had to come out here due to sensing Kakashi-san's chakra. Tsunami admonished while she crossed her own arms. Momochi-kun, Kakashi thought to himself, filing this away for later before he said, well, you came out here to see little old me. I'm touched. Zabuza snorted and shot back, well, I was hoping for a rematch with you. Our battle was interrupted before we could see our battle through to the end. Kakashi ignored the looks of astonishment from Anko and Asuma and replied with a carefree tone, of course. As soon as you heal up, I'll accept that challenge. But in the meantime, you said you fought with Naruto. Zabuza chuckled lowly and nodded, I did. Was a pretty good battle between an injured man and a fully strong genin brat. The Great Uzumaki Festival is in full swing and the woman wants to enjoy it. When it's done, bring your group to Tazuna's and I'll tell you what happened. The Great Uzumaki Festival. Asuma said with an exasperated tone in his voice, and he then asked, they even have a festival named after him. Tsunami nodded and chirped, it's a festival celebrating the hero of Wave and the namesake of our bridge, Uzumaki Naruto. It's due to him bringing light back into this village with not only fighting and temporarily dying for it, but among other great things. Ah, no wonder the orange and blue is everywhere, Anko noted before she grinned and said, man, I can't wait to hear the story of the Gaki fighting you, Zabuza-san. Neither can I, Asuma muttered in annoyance. And speaking of Uzumaki, where is he? We are on a mission to bring him back to Konoha. Zabuza grinned at this and answered, you'll have to find out after the festival, Sarutobi. Until then, Zabuza and Tsunami turned away and walked off, with Kakashi noting that Tsunami wrapped both of her arms around Zabuza's left arm, the two walking close together. Kakashi chuckled as he turned to Anko and Asuma and said, well, you heard him. We've been traveling for a while and our students need to relax anyways. Might as well enjoy ourselves before we hear the story and drag Naruto back in the morning. You're just going to let him go? Asuma asked. Kakashi nodded and said, of course. He's causing no harm. He is Momochi Zabuza, the demon of the hidden mist. Does that not ring a bell to you? Asuma exclaimed, causing a few of the villagers to pause at him before they walked past him to continue the festival. He is a dangerous shinobi, running free in this village. How can you allow him to just leave, especially if he knows where our mission objective is? Asuma continued with a shout. Kakashi and Anko looked at him blankly. Asuma, I think you need a drink to calm your nerves. You're getting too hot under the collar about this, Guy said suddenly beside Anko, causing the latter to shriek in surprise before she turned her body and smashed her cotton candy in his face. Don't do that, Anko exclaimed as she mushed the candy into Guy's face, hard enough for him to bend backward with his right leg off the ground. Ignoring the incredulous look from Asuma, Kakashi opened his book of Ika Ika Paradise and waved him off as he walked away, saying, well, if this conversation is over, I'll see you guys later. Kakashi knew he should be taking this mission seriously, but at the same time, he didn't want to drag Naruto back just yet. Enjoy the festival, kiddo, because you'll be torn away from this place soon, Kakashi sullenly thought. Village of Hisako. Pav. Uzumaki Naruto. With a shout, Naruto's inflamed right hand clawed down the face of an Oto shinobi, leaving a claw mark filled with hellfire behind, and seconds later, the shinobi fell to the ground in agony as his face began to catch on fire, and soon, his body was soon on fire as well, and that fire remained until it was nothing but charred remains. Naruto looked up at the three remaining Oto shinobi, all of whom were staring at him with a mixture of fear and horror, the bodies of their allies all around them, dead or dying. When Naruto and Fu had gotten to where the shrine was located, they had discovered a large digging site with a small red and golden shrine smack dab in the middle of the dugout crater, where a medium-sized gathering of Oto shinobi ruthlessly beating the villagers they had forced to dig around the shrine. Naruto didn't take kindly to this act and immediately sprang into action with the Kubikiri Hako, slaughtering them all with the blade until he took them down with his hands until only 3 remained. I will ask this again, what did you Oto take from the shrine? Naruto asked darkly, his eyes ablaze with the Netherrealm's flames. One of the Oto shinobi, a black-haired boy with wild bed hair, a beige shirt with the kanji for death written on it, a snake-patterned scarf that was around his neck, and gray-black shinobi pants, stepped forward and said, I ain't no puss. Just because you killed those other posers doesn't mean you'll get me. Zaku, an Oto kunoichi, with long black hair tied in a loose ponytail, a green tank top, black bracers, camouflage gray-black pants, and a snake-patterned scarf that was around her neck, shouted from behind the rather bold Oto shinobi, which caused Zaku to look at her. The kunoichi was currently sitting on the ground due to a kunai sticking out of her left hip and right leg, thrown by Naruto during his assault. You saw what he did to the others. Just back down and tell him what he needs to know. The kunoichi continued with fear in her voice. Zaku shook his head and looked back at her and said, I cannot. I can see how strong he is, but I will not betray Orochimaru-sama. Zaku then looked at his arms, which hung limply at the sides, bleeding, and added, no matter how much pain I am in. Zaku. Kin breathed out. Naruto then watched as the final Oto shinobi, a male with bandages covering everything but his left eye, a large gray poncho with long sleeves, a snake-patterned scarf around his neck, black shinobi pants, and a straw raincoat, stepped forward to stand beside Zaku and said, I am in agreement with him, Kin. Orochimaru-sama saved us from certain death, I couldn't forgive myself if I failed him now. Dosu, Kin murmured softly as she continued to sit on the ground behind the two. Naruto shut his eyes and said, how foolish, you two face your death and you still stand to face me. It's foolish, but admirable all the same. It is truly a shame I must kill you here. Naruto stabbed the large blade into the ground and said, but while I will kill the two of you, I shall fight you with my hands instead of the Kubikiri Hako. I will grant you two that mercy. Fuck your mercy. Zaku shouted as he dashed forward and aimed a kick at Naruto's head, but Naruto ducked the kick and then leapt into the air, grabbed Zaku's face, and slammed the Odo shinobi down to the ground. Just as Naruto landed, however, Dosu roared as he ran with his right arm outstretched, his amplifier now visible to Naruto. Naruto scowled and grabbed the arm that was about to strike him, but he then saw Dosu smirk beneath the bandages. It was then that Naruto felt a large amount of pain in his body. So much pain that it caused his body to vibrate slightly. Naruto continued to grip the amplifier on Dosu's right forearm, but without warning, Zaku's foot suddenly slammed into Naruto's stomach, which had him disengage from the hold and leap backward away from the two, but when he landed, he nearly stumbled. Kyomizen resonating echo drill, it damages the target's inner ear, which can knock them off balance just enough for them to die, Dosu said with a smirk on his face. Naruto felt nauseous as he stood against the two and thought, how interesting, the only warrior I know who can use sound waves as a weapon is Sindel, the deceased queen of Edenia. It is a shame that it won't save him from his fate. Naruto then straightened up and watched as the two dashed forward to him, but this time, Naruto pulled out two kunai and waited for his chance. He would need to focus hard to counter the effects of the Kyomizen. Naruto waited for the two to come towards him, and the minute they did, Naruto leapt up and kneed Zaku in the jaw, sending the Odo shinobi to the ground, but Dosu quickly appeared in front of the downed shinobi and thrust his right arm forward to strike Naruto. Naruto dashed to the side and stabbed the amplifier on Dosu's arm with the kunai so hard, that both the kunai and the amplifier exploded upon impact, which also took off Dosu's right arm. Dosu screamed in agony, but Naruto quickly silenced those screams by stabbing the second kunai into the throat of the Odo shinobi. Dosu took a step backward, his screams quickly became gurgles before he fell back to the ground. The sound quickly stopped. Overconfidence is often the death of many shinobi, Naruto said to Dosu's body, which had gone still. Hopefully, you learn this in your next life. Dosu. Zaku screamed in terror before he looked at Naruto with rage in his eyes, and that was when he got up from his spot and dashed towards Naruto while shouting, I'll kill you. Naruto turned his head and pulled out another kunai, and just as Zaku launched himself forward, Naruto leapt as well, and when the two met in the air, Naruto's kunai found itself in the middle of Zaku's face. Naruto landed on the ground on one knee while Zaku landed on his back, as dead as his teammate was a few feet away from him. Naruto rose up from his kneeled position and walked towards Kin, who began to crawl backward away from him. As Naruto walked, he yanked the Kubikiri Hako from the ground and dragged it behind him until he stopped in front of Kin, who looked as if she was going to drop dead in front of him. While they all died for their foolishness, I shall give you a chance. Tell me what was taken from this shrine and I will let you walk away alive, Naruto said, but he then pointed the blade at her and added, if not, I will make your death my example to the rest of the Odo shinobi in this village, your choice. Kin's eyes widened in terror as she stared at the blade and shakily said, I'll tell you everything I know. Just don't kill me, please. Very well, Naruto explained before he stabbed the blade into the ground and said, now let's g. Naruto swiftly knocked Kin out with a chop to the neck and swiftly used her headband to wrap her wrists together and used the headband of a dead shinobi nearby and wrapped her ankles together. Naruto looked up and motioned Fu to come join him. Fu skidded down into the large crater before she bounced to Naruto's side, kneeled beside him and asked, how can I help? Naruto looked to the unconscious Kin and said, take her back to the hotel and put her in an empty room, and try to tie her up with something thicker than these. Fu nodded and asked him, and what will you do? Naruto turned his head and said, I was going to investigate the shrine, but now, I'll be dealing with some unwanted guests. Naruto then stood up and turned his head to see an Oto shinobi with 6 arms and another shinobi with flowing red hair. Fu nodded, lifted up Kin's unconscious body, leapt out of the crater, and dashed off. For a moment, Naruto could see that the red-haired was about to leap after Fu, but the 6-armed shinobi motioned for her to stop. Hey, so this is the threat Kimimaro was worried about. Just a baby-faced blonde, the shinobi said with a laugh, but the female wasn't laughing. In fact, the red-haired kunoichi seemed to realize the threat standing before them. And that made Naruto smirk. This, baby-faced blonde, wields the power of Hellfire. The same Hellfire that has rendered many here asunder. Naruto responded calmly, but the smirk on his face seemed to grow. Let's see how you handle the heat of it. Kidomaru laughed boisterously at Naruto. Look at this Kosi guy. Thinks he's the main boss when he's nothing but a mook, Kidomaru exclaimed with a laugh, but Tayuya still remained silent, as if she was rooted in fear by the blonde standing below them within the crater. Kidomaru. This isn't a game. Look at what this guy has done, Tayuya stated as she swept her hand over the entire area where tons of their shinobi lay deceased, some of them still on fire. This guy is dangerous. We need to kill him now. Oh, I know, Kidomaru stated to her with a frown on his face. But I need to taunt him a little bit. Without warning, Naruto appeared in front of Kidomaru and cold coast the shinobi in the face, sending the multi-limbed shinobi sailing toward the ground. Tayuya took a step back and pulled out a kunai with her right hand and lunged it towards Naruto's head, but the shinobi moved his head to the right in order to avoid it, where he then grabbed her right wrist. The two locked eyes for a moment, her face twisted in a scowl while he had a grin on his face. Far too slow to strike me, Naruto told her. Just then, Naruto leaned forward and rammed his right elbow into her gut, then raised his elbow upwards sharply, nailing her underneath the chin, which sent her off of the pillar they were standing on. Tayuya managed to land on her feet and quickly pulled out several kunai and launched them towards the blonde male. While in the air, Naruto summoned his Hellfire chain and twirled it around quickly, deflecting the many kunai that were heading his way before thrusting it to her as he shouted, "Get over here." Tayuya dashed backward to avoid the fire-made kunai, but Naruto tugged at it hard to send him soaring to the ground, where he landed in a crouch. Naruto quickly rose up and aimed a punch at her head, but Tayuya leaned back to avoid the punch and aimed a kick to his gut. Naruto caught her extended foot by the ankle, pulled her close, and punched her in the middle of the face, sending her upper body slamming into the ground. Naruto gripped her leg and began to turn his body clockwise at a fast rate, slowly lifting Tayuya off the ground with each go around before he let go of her leg, sending her sailing through the air before she crashed against a steel beam. Child's play, Naruto chuckled out loud to himself with a cross of his arms. Just then, Kidomaru leapt out of the rubble he had fallen into and shouted, "Kumo Soka, spider web flower." Kidomaru spat out several strands of web towards Naruto. Naruto saw this and summoned his Hellfire kunai and shot it towards Kidomaru's webs. Naruto quickly released his hold on the chair and fired several more chains toward the Oto shinobi's web, which caused each web to melt under its extreme heat. Kidomaru snarled and avoided the chains that Naruto sent before he jumped into the air and shouted, "Kumo Nenkin." He placed his 6 hands against his mouth and pulled out this golden, sticky material, which quickly took the shape of kunai and became hard as steel, which he then launched towards Naruto's running form. Naruto slammed his foot against the flat side of the Kubikiri Hako to unearth it from where he stabbed it down and used it to deflect the golden kunai that had come towards him before he twisted his body and launched the blade towards the 6-armed shinobi. Kidomaru growled and moved to the side to avoid the blade and once again pulled the sticky gold material from his mouth, but instead of kunai, each strand of the gold material became short blades. Kidomaru landed in front of Naruto and began to stab the short swords towards the Uzumaki, but the shinobi avoided each strike as fast as he could and then performed a backflip out of nowhere, kicking Kidomaru underneath the chin to put the 6-armed shinobi unbalanced while Naruto went backward in the air. Naruto recovered in the air and sent a Hellfire chain toward Kidomaru, which impaled the shinobi in the chest before Naruto shouted, "Come here." Naruto then tugged Kidomaru hard enough for him to fly off of his feet, where Naruto smirked and twisted his body in the air repeatedly, causing Kidomaru to swing around in a circular motion before Naruto let go of the chain, causing the Oto shinobi to soar into a stone pillar, which cracked and exploded upon impact, burying Kidomaru beneath its rubble. Naruto landed on another pillar and crossed his arms in thought. This was going easier than expected. Just then, the sound of a flute reached his ears, causing him to turn his head to stare at Tayuya, who was glaring at him hateful. Naruto then noticed 3 dark violet chakra blobs forming around him. The blobs then began to take shape into 3 beings, and when the chakra faded away, Naruto was surprised. Standing around him were 3 demons, and while each demon was different in appearance, each demon wielded a different weapon, and all of them were very large and muscular. One wore a dark green full-body suit and its hair covered its entire head and face, and it was wielding a giant studded metal club. The other was shirtless and wore dark pants and was bald with scars on its head. It also wore a blindfold and it wielded a thorn-like weapon tied to each arm. The last had its upper body covered in bandages and wore brown pants. Its head is in an awkward position and has several needles pinned on it. It didn't have arms, so it didn't have any weapons. But each demon has a purple, rope-like belt tied in an inverted bow around its waist, similar to Tayuya's own bow. Naruto was impressed. The only being he had ever known to summon demons was Quan Kai, and while these were low-level demons he could take on anytime, he was still impressed that a human would be able to summon them with music. She is truly strong, Naruto noted thoughtfully as he stared at her before he shouted vocally. You impress me. To be able to summon demons is a powerful feat. However, these 3 are only low-level demons. They are no match for me. Tayuya scowled and shouted, You see trash. I'll make you eat those words. She then placed the flute to her lips and began to play. The 3 doki immediately launched themselves towards Naruto, who leapt off the pillar backward, his arms still crossed. The spike-wielding doki appeared before him and tried to stab at Naruto at a relentless pace, but Naruto was able to avoid the many strikes before the club-wielding doki pushed him aside and swung the club down with brutal force, but Naruto smacked the club away and dashed backward, but the 3rd doki appeared behind. Naruto quickly turned around and blocked the roundhouse kick with both of his arms. The force of the kick sent Naruto sailing down to the ground, but he rebounded off of the ground and landed on his feet. The 3 doki appeared with a flicker around Naruto, the spike doki, and the club doki to his left and right respectively, while the kick doki appeared before him. The kick doki aimed a kick to Naruto's face, but Naruto twisted his body to avoid the kick only to duck the wide side-to-side swing of the club doki, and as he knelt down, he swept his leg under both the club doki and kick doki, sending them both to the ground. Naruto noticed Spike Doki aiming his spikes towards his head and rolling forward onto his feet before he flipped back and nailed Spike Doki in the face with a Hellfire-infused left kick, sending the Doki stumbling back. Naruto flipped to his feet once more and was kicked in the face by the kick Doki, which sent him flying back into a stone pillar, causing a spider web to crack within it before he fell to the ground, but Naruto got back on his feet to avoid the club swing of Club Doki. Naruto twisted his body around so he stood behind the club doki and wrapped his arms around the waist of the doki before bending backward sharply, slamming the large creature into the ground head first. Naruto dropped to the ground and rolled from under club doki and rose to his feet just to duck once again due to Spike Doki suddenly flicking before him with its right arm already in the stabbing motion. Naruto crouched down and summoned a Hellfire kunai and rammed it into the gut of the doki before he rose up sharply, slicing through the body and head of the doki before he jumped up and kicked the left side of its head, sending it soaring away from the battle. But while Naruto was in the air, Kick Doki flickered in front of Naruto and kicked the shinobi in the chest, sending Naruto flying backward and slamming against another pillar as Naruto began to fall forward. Kick Doki flickered in front of him again and kneed Naruto in the gut, causing Naruto to fully go through the pillar at an upward angle, sending him into the air. Naruto managed to catch himself in the air just as Kick Doki flickered in front of him again, but this time, Naruto rammed his Hellfire kunai through the middle of its head. He smirked as the doki went limp and then shouted, "Get over here." The kunai pierced through the doki's skull as the Hellfire chain flew down toward Tayuya's form. Tayuya saw this and rolled to the side, allowing the kunai to pierce through the stone. Naruto tugged at the chain hard while placing his feet up, so when he tugged, his feet slammed into Kick Doki's body, sending the two whipping down to where the kunai was pierced. Once the two got to where the kunai was placed, the stone exploded upon impact, causing smoke to billow from the ruins. Naruto rose up from the rubble and took a step back, panting slightly as he placed his hand over his gut. That was difficult. Naruto turned his head and realized Tayuya was missing. Without warning, Tayuya flickered in front of Naruto with her arm coased back in an attempt to punch him. Naruto sidestepped the punch but was not able to avoid the sharp jab of her knee which slammed into his gut. Naruto staggered back and swayed left and then right to avoid her quick jabs before he ducked the third jab and leapt off the ground to knee her under the chin, sending her into the air. Naruto quickly moved his hand forward and shouted, "Come here," causing the Hellfire chain to shoot out towards her. The chain slammed into Tayuya's left shoulder. Naruto then pulled her down sharply and released his hold of the chain before he tackled her out of the air and slammed her into the ground. Tayuya wrapped her legs around his waist to keep him close while she swiped her elbows at him, but Naruto grabbed her arms and held her to the ground. Tayuya growled and leaned her head back before moving it forward sharply, causing her forehead to collide with Naruto's, sending his head whipping backward, but he quickly responded by whipping his head forward and returning the headbutt, sending her head slamming into the ground. Naruto felt her legs around his waist go lax, which allowed him to break out of her hold. Naruto stood up and shook his head, trying to clear the cobwebs from his mind while Tayuya slowly rose to her feet as well, just as dazed as Naruto. Just then, the two both heard, "Gotcha. Kumo Soka." Tayuya turned around to face the owner of that noise before her body whipped into Naruto's body, causing them both to soar back into a stone column, with Kidomaru's web attached to the both of them. "Haha. Score in one," Kidomaru exclaimed. When Naruto tilted his head to glance at the shinobi, his eyes widened in surprise. Kidomaru's entire appearance had changed. His skin had become dark red. His irises were now a sickly yellow with dark black eye sclerae. He had canine teeth, and elongated fingernails, and his hair had become longer and gray. He also had horns on his forehead, shoulders, and elbows, and his mouth became wider. Tayuya noticed his change and said, "Fuck." He activated his cursed seal. Cursed seal, Naruto thought to himself. That was the reason for this change. Interesting. Naruto looked down at the webbing and noticed that it was gold in color, nothing like the web that he had melted earlier, and it was very dense. He could hardly move within its grasp. A perfect trap. Anyone who didn't wield the power of the Netherrealm would have a lot of difficulty with it. "You two lovebirds were so into your battle, I had to take advantage of it," Kidomaru said, his voice deeper and rougher than before. "So thanks for the distraction, Tayuya, but it's time for me to complete this mission." Tayuya rolled her eyes and said, yeah. Can you get me out of here now? This isn't an exactly comfortable position, you know." Both Naruto and Tayuya saw Kidomaru smirk at her words, and suddenly a look of foreboding appeared on Tayuya's face. "Sorry, Tayuya," Kidomaru said, his smirk betraying the tone he was trying to make. "But this is where we part ways." Tayuya's eyes widened in horror before she said, "Very funny, idiot. Come get me out of here," but despite trying to keep her voice level, Naruto could hear the fear in her voice. Kidomaru shook his head and replied, "I can't do that, Tayuya. Kimamaro's orders were, and I quote, the moment we kill the potential threat, you Kidomaru are to exterminate the dead weight known as Tayuya. And as we both know, if I refused, he would kill me. So, rather you than me, you fucking cocksucker." Tayuya shouted in rage, but the fear in her voice rang clear in Naruto's ears. The one thing Naruto could not stand was a betrayal. Not only due to Quan Chi's betrayal but Mizuki's betrayal as well. Even if she was an enemy, she had put up one hell of a fight, while he hid away like a bug under a leaf, and she didn't deserve to die by her scumbag team. Naruto's eyes narrowed in the direction of the multi-limbed shinobi and growled, "So you would rather betray your teammate to save your own skin? I'll see you burn for this deception." Kidomaru shrugged and said, "Rather her than me. As shinobi, we have to make certain sacrifices. It doesn't help that Tayuya has been a right pain in our asses since she joined up. Her stank attitude was what caused this. Doesn't help that she doesn't even have a cursed seal. Literal dead weight." Tayuya growled in fury at the spider-like shinobi and shouted, "I'm going to chop off all of your arms and shove them down your throat and up yours when I get my hands on you." The shinobi smirked and said, It's a good thing then that I will be killing you from a distance. Kidomaru flipped back to gain some distance before he jumped onto a stone pillar, and when he landed, he created a bow out of his Kumo Nenkin and said, Kumo Senkyu, Suzaku, Spider War Bow, Terrible Split. With a thick strand of web that became an arrow, he stood on one leg while using his limbs to pull at the bow to notch the arrow. Tayuya began to struggle violently as she shouted, Damn you Kidomaru. Calm down, Naruto admonished with a frown on his face. I can get us out of this. I just need you to stay still. Stay still. How can I trust you to get us out of here? We just tried to kill each other. Tayuya exclaimed while continuing her struggle. We were enemies. You were betrayed. We have a common foe in that spider shinobi up there. As long as you don't try to kill me after we are free, then I will not strike you, Naruto told her with a frown on his face. Tayuya scowled and looked up at him and exclaimed, And why should I trust you? My own fucking teammate is going to kill me, so why should I trust my enemy, even a former one? Naruto quirked a small grin and said, Because I have too much to live for. Tayuya paused for a moment before she stood stock still while she retorted, Well, what do I have to fucking lose? Naruto smirked and said, Only your life, before flames deep from the netherrealm began to build around the two of them. Tayuya looked around her fearfully and said, My life is in your hands, you idiot. I'll find you in the afterlife if you fuck up. Naruto chuckled at this and replied, And I will await you in the Engether realm shall I fail. The flames then roared to life just as Kidomaru shot his arrow, and when the flames died down, Naruto and Tayuya leapt to the side, barely able to avoid the arrow that pierced and destroyed the stone column they were trapped on. What? Kidomaru shouted in shock. Tayuya smirked and exclaimed, Time to be a woman of my word. Naruto grinned and replied, Good. Let's serve up barbecue spider arms, courtesy of me. Tayuya laughed and re-summoned her doki and pointed them at Kidomaru while Naruto disappeared in a burst of hellfire. Thanks for listening. In the next part. In the meantime, please leave a review, I would love to hear your feedback. Especially if it helps me improve the overall story.